She glanced around at the openly staring customers. Everyone saw, they'll talk. Let them, Daniel said firmly. You've done nothing wrong. Mr. Johnson approached cautiously. Mr. Xavier, Miss Lawson, perhaps you'd like to step into the back room for a moment, to collect yourselves. Daniel looked to Violet for her decision. After a moment's hesitation, she shook her head. No, thank you, Mr. Johnson. We'll be leaving now. Please have our supplies sent out as usual. The storekeeper nodded. Of course, Miss Lawson. And, for what it's worth, not everyone in town thinks poorly of you. Your father's actions are his own. The unexpected support brought tears to Violet's eyes. Thank you, she managed before allowing Daniel to guide her from the store. Outside, more townspeople had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Daniel ignored them all, helping Violet onto her horse with gentle efficiency before mounting his own. As they rode out of town, Violet kept her gaze fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares and whispers that followed them. They were almost to the edge of town when a voice called out, "Miss Lawson, wait!" Violet turned to see Sheriff Burns jogging toward them, badge glinting in the winter sunlight. Daniel tensed beside her, but the lawman's expression held no hostility as he approached. "Miss Lawson," Burns said, slightly out of breath, "I wanted to catch you before you left. There's something you should know about your father." Violet steeled herself. "What has he done now, Sheriff? It's not what he's done, it's what's happening to him." Burns removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. "Doc Williams examined him last week. Your father's sick, Miss Lawson. Liver's failing. Doc doesn't give him more than a few months." The news hit Violet like a physical blow. Despite everything, the neglect, the cruelty, the abandonment of all paternal responsibility, Horace Lawson was still her father, the only family she had left. "I see," she said finally, her voice surprisingly steady. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." Burns nodded solemnly. "I thought you should know. Whatever's between you two. Well, time has a way of running out when we least expect it," Daniel spoke up. "Is Lawson getting proper care?" "As much as he'll accept," Burns replied. "He's still drinking, which isn't helping matters. Refuses to stay at Doc's place for treatment." Violet felt Daniel's eyes on her, gauging her reaction, waiting for her decision. She knew what he was silently asking. What did she want to do about this information? "Thank you again, Sheriff," she said at last. "If you'll excuse us, we need to return to the ranch." Burns looked like he wanted to say more but merely nodded, replacing his hat. "Safe journey to you both." They rode in silence for nearly a mile before Daniel finally spoke. "What are you thinking?" Violet kept her eyes on the road ahead. "I'm thinking my father made his choices long ago and I've made mine, Violet." His voice was gentle but insistent. "He's dying. We're all dying," she replied tonelessly, "some just more efficiently than others." Daniel reined his horse to a stop, forcing Violet to halt as well. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she turned to face him. What she saw in his expression wasn't judgment but understanding, deep, painful understanding. "When my wife died," he said quietly, "I was at the front. I never got to say goodbye, never got to tell her all the things I should have said." His gaze held her steadily. "I wouldn't wish that regret on anyone." Tears filled Violet's eyes, blurring her vision. "What am I supposed to do? Forgive him for drinking away our home? For blaming me for Mother's death? For every cruel word and broken promise?" "No," Daniel said. "Forgiveness is your choice to make or withhold. But facing him, saying whatever you need to say while there's still time, that's different." A tear slipped down Violet's cheek. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Daniel reached across the space between their horses to take her gloved hand in his. "You're the strongest person I know, Violet Lawson. And whatever you decide, you won't face it alone. Not anymore." The simple promise not to fix things for her, not to tell her what to do, but simply to stand beside her whatever she chose broke something open inside Violet. Tears came freely now, years of pent-up grief and anger finally finding release. Daniel said nothing more, just held her hand as she wept, a steady anchor in the storm of emotion. When at last her tears subsided, Violet took a deep, shuddering breath. "I need time," she said, "to think, to decide." "Take all the time you need," Daniel replied, releasing her hand with gentle reluctance. "The choice is yours." They continued their journey back to the ranch in companionable silence, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them, a deepening of trust, a sharing of burdens, a promise made and accepted. The days that followed were filled with quiet routine as life at the Xavier Ranch returned to normal after the storm. Mrs. Holloway, having finally made it back to town, returned with exaggerated tales of Daniel's defense of Violet's honor at the general store, which had apparently grown with each telling until the story involved drawn pistols and threats of duels at dawn. "Ridiculous," Daniel muttered when she reported this development over supper. "I merely prevented a drunk from harassing his daughter." "Well, the town sees it differently," Mrs. Holloway declared with evident satisfaction. "Half the women are swooning over your gallantry, and the other half are reconsidering their opinion of Miss Lawson." Violet, who had been quiet since their return from town, looked up in surprise. "Reconsidering how?" Mrs. Holloway patted her hand. "Let's just say that seeing Horace Lawson at his worst while you maintained your dignity has shifted some perspectives, and Mr. Xavier's obvious concern for your welfare hasn't gone unnoticed." Daniel cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. "Mrs. Holloway, perhaps we could discuss something else." "Of course, Mr. Xavier," the housekeeper agreed with a knowing smile. "Though I should mention that Mrs. Burns, the sheriff's wife, specifically asked after Miss Lawson's health and extended an invitation to tea next time you're in town." This news startled Violet even more than the general change in attitude. Elizabeth Burns was one of the most respected women in Colorado City, wife of the sheriff and daughter of one of the area's original settlers. Her social approval was as good as a formal rehabilitation of Violet's standing. "That's unexpected," Violet managed. "Not really," Mrs. Holloway countered. "Elizabeth Burns has always had a good head on her shoulders. She recognizes genuine character when she sees it." After Mrs. Holloway had left for the evening and the house was quiet, Violet found herself unable to settle. Her thoughts kept returning to the news about her father, to the scene in town, to Daniel's words about regret and lost chances. She wandered to the sitting room, intending to select a book to distract herself, only to find Daniel already there, working at his desk by lamplight. He looked up at her entrance, setting aside his pen. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Violet shook her head. "Too many thoughts." "I know something about that." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Would company help, or would you prefer solitude?" "Company," she admitted, taking the offered seat. "If you don't mind." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the occasional crackle from the fireplace and the wind outside. It was Daniel who finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what Burns told us," he said carefully. "About your father." Violet tensed. "So have I. And—" She sighed, twisting her hands in her lap. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to ignore it, to let him die as he lived alone and bitter, but another part remembers the father he once was," Daniel finished gently. Violet looked up, surprised by his insight. "Yes. Before the drink took hold, before Mother died, he used to. He would lift me onto his shoulders so I could see over crowds, taught me to ride when I was barely big enough to reach the stirrups." Her voice caught. Read to me every night, even when he was exhausted from working the fields. Daniel's expression was one of quiet understanding. Those memories are real too, Violet, just as real as the pain that came after. But they don't erase what he became, she countered. No, Daniel agreed. Nothing erases that. The question is whether you can find peace with whatever decision you make now. Violet studied his face in the warm lamplight, the strong lines softened by shadow, the blue eyes that had seen their own share of loss and regret. What would you do if you were me? Daniel considered her question carefully. I would remember that we rarely regret the kindnesses we extend, even to those who may not deserve them, but we often regret the kindnesses withheld when the chance is gone. His words settled into Violet's heart, resonating with a truth she had been avoiding. I'm afraid, she confessed. Afraid that if I see him again, if I try to help him now, it will just be one more disappointment, one more rejection. That's a valid fear, Daniel acknowledged. But consider this. You're not the same woman who left Colorado City 3 months ago. You're stronger now, more sure of yourself. Whatever happens with your father, it can't diminish who you've become. Violet felt tears threaten again. And who is that exactly? Daniel's gaze was steady, his voice certain. A remarkable woman, intelligent, resilient, compassionate despite having every reason not to be. He paused, something shifting in his expression. A woman I've grown to care for deeply. The confession hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Violet's heart raced as she realized they had crossed into new territory, one where feelings long left unspoken were finally acknowledged. Daniel, she began, uncertain what to say, how to respond to the vulnerability he'd just displayed. You don't need to say anything, he assured her quickly. This isn't the time with everything else you're facing. I wanted you to know. Whatever you decide about your father, about your future here or elsewhere, you should know that you matter, to me. The tenderness in his voice undid her composure. I don't deserve your regard, she whispered. That's where you're wrong, Daniel replied, leaning forward to take her hands in his. You deserve so much more than you've allowed yourself to believe possible. Impulsively, Violet leaned across the desk and pressed her lips to his cheek, a brief, gentle touch that conveyed what words could not. Thank you, she murmured, drawing back. Daniel's expression was a mixture of surprise and something deeper, more intense. For a moment, Violet thought he might pull her back, might turn the chaste gesture into something more. But he simply nodded, releasing her hands reluctantly. Whatever you decide about your father, he said, I'm here. I know. And she did know with a certainty that felt like solid ground beneath her feet after months of shifting sand. I think I need to see him. One last time, Daniel nodded. When? Tomorrow, Violet decided, surprising herself with the immediacy of her choice. Before I lose my courage, I'll take you, Daniel offered. First light if that suits. Violet shook her head. No, this is something I need to do alone. She saw concern flash across his face and added, but perhaps you could accompany me to town. Wait for me while I speak with him, of course, Daniel agreed, relief evident in his voice. Whatever you need. Violet rose, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had become, how vulnerable they'd both allowed themselves to be. I should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be challenging. Daniel stood as well, maintaining a respectful distance despite the connection they'd just shared. Good night, Violet. Try not to worry too much. You're stronger than you know. As she made her way back to her cabin through the cold night air, Violet wondered if that was true, if she really did possess the strength Daniel seemed to see in her. Tomorrow would test that theory in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Xavier Ranch as Violet and Daniel prepared for their second journey to Colorado City in as many days. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, though occasionally Daniel would point out a hawk circling overhead or a deer track in the snow. Small observations that grounded Violet in the present moment rather than the confrontation ahead. As they approached town, Violet's apprehension grew. "Maybe this is a mistake," she said, pulling her horse to a stop at the edge of the settlement. Daniel halted beside her. "Do you want to turn back?" She took a deep breath, considering. No, I need to do this, but... What do I say to him?" Violet asked, her voice small. After everything, what words could possibly matter now? Daniel turned in his saddle to face her fully. "The words that will bring you peace, Violet. That's all that matters now. Whatever you need to say in anger, in sorrow, in forgiveness, if that's where your heart leads, say it for yourself, not for him." His wisdom steadied her. "You'll wait for me, as long as it takes," he promised. "I'll be at the hotel restaurant. Take your time." They rode the rest of the way into town, attracting far less attention than the day before. Daniel helped Violet dismount at the modest boarding house where her father had taken a room after losing their family home. "Thank you," she said, straightening her skirts nervously. "For what?" "For believing I can do this. For seeing something in me worth believing in." Daniel's smile was gentle. "That's the easiest thing I've ever done." Violet Lawson. With his quiet confidence bolstering her courage, Violet entered the boarding house. The proprietress, Mrs. Carlton, looked up from her ledger with surprise. "Miss Lawson, this is unexpected." "Hello, Mrs. Carlton. I'm here to see my father." The older woman's expression turned sympathetic. "He's had a rough night, dear, been coughing something awful. Doc Williams was here at dawn." Concern pierced through Violet's emotional armor. Is it worse?" "Hard to say with your father," Mrs. Carlton replied diplomatically. "The drinking doesn't help his condition, that's certain." She gestured toward the stairs. "He's in room 4. I can't promise he'll be sensible, though." "Thank you for the warning." Violet squared her shoulders and climbed the narrow staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last. Outside room 4, she paused, hand raised to knock. What would she find on the other side? The bitter, angry man who'd accosted her at the general store. The broken shell of the father she once adored. Or something in between, a man lost to grief and alcohol, but perhaps, in his final days, capable of something like reconciliation. There was only one way to find out. She knocked firmly. A bout of harsh coughing answered her before a raspy voice called, "Who is it?" "It's Violet, father." "May I come in?" Silence then. "It's not locked." Violet turned the knob and entered a room that immediately assaulted her senses with the smell of sickness, unwashed linens, and stale whiskey. Her father lay propped against pillows on a narrow bed, a shadow of the robust man he'd once been. His skin had a yellowish tinge, his eyes were sunken, and his hands trembled where they rested on the threadbare blanket. "Come to gloat?" he asked, though the words lacked the venom she'd expected. "No," Violet replied, closing the door behind her. "I came because Sheriff Burns told me you're ill." Horace gave a wheezing laugh that turned into another coughing fit. "Dying, you mean? No use prettying it up." Violet moved to the room's single chair, positioning it beside the bed before sitting. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can do?" Her father regarded her with bloodshot eyes. "Now you ask that. Bit late, wouldn't you say?" The accusation stung, but Violet refused to be baited into the familiar pattern of recrimination and defense. "Perhaps, but I'm asking now." Something shifted in Horace's expression, surprise, perhaps, at her calm response. He looked away, staring at the window where weak winter sunlight filtered through grimy glass. "Why'd you really come, Violet? Guilty conscience?" "No," she said truthfully. "I came because, despite everything, you're my father, and because—" She hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. Because I don't want to live with the regret of never having said what needs to be said between us. Horace's gaze returned to her face. And what's that exactly? Violet took a deep breath. That I loved you once. That I mourned not just mother's death, but yours too, the death of the father you were before the drink took you. His face contorted, whether in pain or emotion Violet couldn't tell. Your mother was everything to me. When she died, I lost her too, Violet interrupted, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. I was 19, father, I needed you, but you weren't there. You chose the bottle over me every time. Horace had no answer for that, just a slight slumping of his shoulders that might have been shame. I'm not here to list your failings, Violet continued after a moment. God knows I have my own. I'm here to say that I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Her father's eyes widened at that. Forgive me, just like that? No, not just like that, Violet corrected him. It's taken months. It may take years more to fully mean it, but I'm starting now while there's still time to say it to your face. Tears appeared in Horace's bloodshot eyes, shocking Violet. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her father cry, perhaps at her mother's funeral, though even then he'd been more angry than sorrowful. You always were stubborn, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Like your mother that way, so I've been told. A silence fell between them, not exactly comfortable but not hostile either. Finally, Horace spoke again, his voice softer than before. That rancher, Xavier, he treating you right? The question surprised Violet. Yes, he's a good man. A fair employer. Horace's gaze sharpened despite his evident weakness. Just an employer, is he? Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's not the way he looked at you in the store, Horace interrupted, and the way he was ready to kill me for grabbing your arm. That's not how an employer looks at an employee. Violet didn't know how to respond to that observation, so accurate yet so unexpected from her father. Your mother would like him, I think, Horace continued, a distant look coming into his eyes. She always said you needed someone who could match your spirit, not try to break it. Father, Violet began, uncertain where this conversation was heading. Horace reached out suddenly, his trembling hand grasping hers with surprising strength. I was wrong yesterday. Your mother wouldn't be ashamed of you, she'd be proud, so damn proud. His voice broke. She always was, you know, even when I wasn't. The admission, the apology embedded within it struck Violet speechless. After all the years of blame and bitterness, this moment of clarity from her dying father was almost more than she could comprehend. Thank you for saying that, she managed finally. Horace released her hand, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. I don't have much time left. Doc says it could be weeks, maybe days. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. I don't expect you to care for me. I haven't earned that, but I'd like not to die a complete stranger to my only child. It was as close to a plea as Horace Lawson had ever come, and Violet found herself nodding before she'd fully considered what she was agreeing to. I'll visit again, she promised, and I'll speak with Doc Williams about your care. Relief washed over her father's gaunt features. You always were a better person than me, Violet, better than I deserved as a daughter. Perhaps we both deserved better than what life gave us, Violet replied softly, but we still have this time. Let's not waste it with more regrets. When Violet finally left her father's room an hour later, she felt both emotionally drained and strangely lightened. Nothing had been fully resolved, too much damage had been done for one conversation to heal all wounds, but a beginning had been made. A door left open that had long been shut. She found Daniel waiting patiently in the hotel restaurant as promised, nursing a cup of coffee as he reviewed some papers. He looked up the moment she entered, rising to his feet with concern evident in his expression. "How was it?" he asked as she approached. Violet sank into the chair opposite him. "Difficult, necessary, better than I feared, not as good as I might have hoped." Daniel signaled the waitress. "Tea for the lady, please, and some of that apple cake if you have it." Violet smiled weakly at his thoughtfulness. "How did you know I needed something sweet?" "You're pale as a ghost," he replied simply. "Sugar helps after an emotional trial. At least, that's what my mother always claimed." As the tea and cake arrived, Violet gradually related the conversation with her father, his unexpected vulnerability, his partial apology, his request that she visit again. "What will you do?" Daniel asked when she'd finished. Violet sipped her tea, considering. "Visit him again, I suppose. Perhaps speak with Doc Williams about making him more comfortable." She set her cup down, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. "He mentioned you, actually." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Oh," he said, "my mother would have liked you." Violet felt color rising to her cheeks again. "He also implied that your interest in me might be more than professional." Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching her carefully. "Would that disturb you if he were right?" The directness of the question took Violet's breath away. No, it wouldn't disturb me." Something like hope flickered in Daniel's eyes. "Good. Because your father, despite his many failings, is an observant man." Before Violet could respond to this remarkable statement, the hotel doors burst open and Sheriff Burns rushed in, his expression grave. "Xavier," he called, spotting them immediately. "Need your help. Fire at the Peterson place, their barn. Every able-bodied man is needed for the bucket brigade." Daniel was on his feet instantly. "Of course. Miss Lawson, will you be—" "I'm coming too," Violet declared, standing. "Mrs. Peterson has young children. Someone needs to see to them while the men fight the fire." Daniel looked like he might protest, but the determined set of Violet's jaw convinced him otherwise. "Very well. Let's go." The scene at the Peterson farm was one of controlled chaos. Flames leaped from the large barn, threatening to spread to the nearby house. A line of men had formed between the well and the blaze, passing buckets of water with grim efficiency. Women gathered children and valuables, preparing to evacuate if the fire couldn't be contained. Daniel immediately joined the bucket brigade, while Violet sought out Mrs. Peterson, finding her clutching her youngest child with the other three huddled nearby, their small faces tight with fear. "Mrs. Peterson," Violet approached, setting aside any awkwardness from their previous encounters in town. "Let me help you get the children somewhere safe." The harried woman looked up, recognition and relief washing over her features. "Miss Lawson, thank God. Timothy won't stop crying and Sarah keeps trying to run back to the house for her doll." "I've got them," Violet assured her, kneeling to address the children. "Hello there, I'm Miss Lawson. Your mama needs help keeping you safe while the men stop the fire. Can you be brave and come with me to that big oak tree over there? We'll be able to see everything from there, but we'll be out of the way." The children, responding to her calm authority, nodded solemnly. Violet took the hands of the two middle children, instructing the oldest to follow closely, while Mrs. Peterson carried the toddler. From their vantage point beneath the oak, they watched the battle against the flames. Violet kept the children distracted with stories and simple games, all while keeping one eye on the fire and, she had to admit, on Daniel, who worked tirelessly alongside men who had likely gossiped about him for years. "He's quite something, isn't he, Mrs. Peterson remarked, following Violet's gaze to where Daniel passed a bucket with methodical precision. Violet felt herself flush. "He's a good man." "Yes," Mrs. Peterson agreed thoughtfully. "I'm beginning to see that, And perhaps I've been unfair in my assessment of you as well, Miss Lawson." The unexpected acknowledgment caught Violet off guard. "You hardly know me, Mrs. Peterson. I know you came immediately to help my children when you could have stayed safely in town," the other woman pointed out. "And I know that Mr. Xavier values you highly, which says something about your character." She bounced the fussing toddler on her hip. "The town has been hard on you since your return, perhaps unfairly so." "Perhaps," Violet agreed cautiously. Mrs. Peterson smiled suddenly. "Elizabeth Burns speaks highly of you. Says you have uncommon intelligence and dignity. High praise from Elizabeth." Before Violet could respond to this surprising information, a cheer went up from the men at the barn. The flames appeared to be retreating, the worst of the danger past. "Thank God," Mrs. Peterson breathed. "John put everything we had into that barn, if we'd lost it completely." "It looks like they saved the structure at least," Violet observed, watching as men continued to douse smoldering sections with water. Eventually, the exhausted firefighters began to disperse, their faces and clothes blackened with soot. Daniel made his way toward the oak tree, his expression lighting with relief when he spotted Violet safe with the Peterson family. "The fire's contained," he reported, his voice hoarse from smoke. "The north wall and roof are badly damaged, but the foundation is sound. It can be rebuilt." "Thank you," Mrs. Peterson said fervently. "If you hadn't all come so quickly." Daniel shook his head. "Just neighbors helping neighbors, madam." Mr. Peterson approached then, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Xavier, I owe you my thanks. You and your men worked like demons." "Happy to help, Peterson." Daniel extended his hand, which the other man clasped firmly, a simple gesture that nonetheless symbolized something significant: acceptance, respect, community. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Peterson caught Violet's arm. "Miss Lawson, the children and I would be pleased if you would join us for Sunday dinner sometime soon. Perhaps you and Mr. Xavier both." The invitation, so ordinary yet so meaningful in its social recognition, touched Violet deeply. "We'd be honored, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both Violet and Daniel lost in their own thoughts about the day's events. It wasn't until they had seen to the horses and were walking toward the main house that Daniel finally broke the silence. "You were remarkable today," he said. "With the Peterson children, and before that with your father." Violet glanced at him, noting the admiration in his gaze despite his disheveled, smoke-stained appearance. "I only did what needed doing. That's precisely what makes it remarkable." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Violet," whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by Rodriguez, who came hurrying from the bunkhouse. "Boss, telegram came while you were gone. Courier brought it special from town." Daniel frowned, accepting the envelope. "Thank you, Rodriguez." The hand retreated and Daniel quickly scanned the message, his expression growing serious. "Bad news?" Violet asked. "Potentially," he admitted, folding the telegram and tucking it into his pocket. "Cattle buyers from Kansas City arriving next week, earlier than expected. We'll need to have everything in order: accounts, stock numbers, grazing projections." "We will," Violet assured him. "I'll start first thing tomorrow." Daniel studied her face. "You've had an exhausting day. Your father, the fire. It can wait until you've rested." "I'm stronger than I look," Violet reminded him with a small smile. "Besides, I want to help. This sale is important for the ranch, for us," Daniel corrected quietly. "It's important for us." The simple correction, the inclusion of her in the ranch's future, made Violet's heart skip. "Then we'll be ready," she promised. The week that followed was a blur of activity as everyone at the Xavier Ranch prepared for the cattle buyer's visit. The accounts were meticulously updated. The best stock was moved to pastures closer to the ranch house for easy viewing, and even the main house received extra attention, with Mrs. Holloway declaring that important business required a proper setting. Through it all, Violet made time to visit her father every other day. The conversations were sometimes difficult, occasionally heartbreaking, but increasingly honest. Horace Lawson was fading quickly, his liver failing more rapidly than even Doc Williams had predicted. But in his lucid moments, father and daughter began the slow, painful work of reconciliation. "He asked about you today," Violet told Daniel as they sat in his office late one evening, reviewing final figures for the cattle sale. "My father, I mean." Daniel looked up from the ledger. "Oh, he wanted to know if you were courting me properly yet." Violet felt her cheeks warm at the memory. His words, not mine. Daniel set down his pen, his expression suddenly serious. "And what did you tell him? That our relationship was complicated?" Violet fidgeted with the edge of a paper. "That we were colleagues and friends, but that recent events had perhaps suggested the possibility of more." "The possibility," Daniel repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "Is that how you see it?" Violet gathered her courage, meeting his gaze directly. "How do you see it, Daniel?" He rose from his chair, moving around the desk until he stood before her. "I see a woman who walked into my life when I'd stopped expecting anything to change it. A woman of extraordinary intelligence, courage, and grace." His voice softened. "A woman I've fallen in love with, though I've been hesitant to say so given the circumstances of our meeting." The declaration, though perhaps not entirely unexpected after their growing closeness, still took Violet's breath away. "Daniel, you don't need to respond," he said quickly. "I know this is sudden, and with your father's condition and the buyer's coming," Violet stood, closing the small distance between them. "It's not sudden," she interrupted gently. "Not really. Not when every day since we met has been leading to this moment." Hope blazed in Daniel's eyes. "Violet, are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you too," she whispered. "That you saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. That you've spent every day since we met proving wrong anyone who ever called me a waste, including me." Daniel's hands came up to frame her face with exquisite tenderness. "You were never a waste, Violet Lawson. You were always a treasure waiting to be recognized for your true worth." When he lowered his lips to hers, Violet met him halfway in a kiss that felt like coming home, gentle at first, then deepening with the passion of feelings long restrained but finally, gloriously acknowledged. "What happens now?" Violet asked softly when they finally parted. Daniel's thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "Now we face whatever comes next together. The cattle buyers, your father's illness, the town's gossip, all of it. But first—" He stepped back slightly, still holding her hands in his. "First, I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it. No matter what your father or anyone else thinks, you deserve to be honored, cherished, and respected not just as someone I love, but as the remarkable woman you are in your own right." Tears of joy sprang to Violet's eyes. "I would like that very much." Their newfound understanding brought a different quality to their work in the days that followed, a sweet awareness of each other. Small touches and private smiles, even as they maintained professional decorum around the ranch hands and Mrs. Holloway, though the housekeeper's knowing looks suggested their changed relationship, hadn't escaped her notice. The cattle buyers arrived on a clear, cold morning in early January. 3 men from Kansas City, led by a shrewd businessman named Harrison James. They spent the day inspecting stock, reviewing figures, and negotiating prices. Violet participated fully in the discussions, her command of the ranch's finances impressing the initially skeptical buyers. "Your wife has quite a head for business, Xavier," James remarked during a pause in negotiations. Miss Lawson is our accountant, Daniel corrected smoothly, though his eyes met Violet's with warmth. And yes, her expertise is invaluable. By day's end, a deal had been struck that exceeded even Daniel's hopes, a contract for 200 head, with the promise of future business if quality remained consistent. We did it, Violet breathed as the buyer's wagon disappeared down the road toward town, where they would stay the night before departing in the morning. You did it, Daniel countered, pulling her into his arms now that they were alone. Your organization, your projections, your negotiations on the final figure. This success belongs to you, Violet. Before she could demur, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching the ranch at a gallop. As the figure drew closer, Violet recognized the sheriff's deputy, Miss Lawson. The young man called, reining in his horse sharply. Doc Williams sent me. It's your father, madam. He's taken a bad turn. Doc says. He says you should come quick if you want to say goodbye. Violet felt the world tilt beneath her feet, Daniel's strong arm around her waist the only thing keeping her upright. Despite the complications of her relationship with Horace, despite the hurt and anger that still lingered beneath their recent reconciliation, the news hit her with unexpected force. I'll saddle the horses, Daniel said immediately. We can be in town within the hour. The ride to Colorado City passed in a blur for Violet, her mind racing with all the things still unsaid between her and her father, all the conversations they'd never have now. Daniel rode beside her, solid and supportive, occasionally reaching across to touch her arm reassuringly. When they reached the boarding house, Doc Williams was waiting on the porch, his aged face grave. He's still with us, the doctor informed Violet as Daniel helped her dismount. But fading fast. The hemorrhaging has started internally. There's nothing more I can do except keep him comfortable. Thank you, doctor, Violet managed, her voice steadier than she felt. May I see him now, of course. He's been asking for you. Doc Williams glanced at Daniel. Perhaps Mr. Xavier would like to wait downstairs. I want him with me, Violet said firmly. If that's acceptable to you, Daniel. Whatever you need, he replied simply. Horace Lawson lay still and pale on his narrow bed, his breathing labored, his skin waxy with the approaching end. But his eyes, once bloodshot and clouded by alcohol, were surprisingly clear as they fixed on his daughter's face. You came, he whispered as Violet sat beside him. Of course I came, she replied, taking his frail hand in hers. Horace's gaze shifted to Daniel, who stood respectfully near the door. Xavier, take care of her. I intend to, sir, Daniel answered solemnly, though she's quite capable of taking care of herself. A ghost of a smile touched Horace's lips. Ain't that the truth? Always was the strong one, my Violet. His focus returned to his daughter. I want you to know. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, of the life you're making. Tears slipped down Violet's cheeks. I wish she could have seen it. I wish you both could see what comes next. I see enough, Horace replied, his voice growing fainter. I see you found a good man. A man who values you proper. His grip on her hand tightened briefly. I'm sorry, Violet, for all of it, for not being the father you deserved. I know, Violet said softly. I forgive you, Father, and I hope you found some peace. Horace's eyes closed briefly, then opened again with visible effort. More than I expected, enough to go easier. His gaze sought Daniel again. You got a ring for my daughter yet, Xavier? Daniel moved forward to stand beside Violet. Not yet, sir, but I have intentions with her permission. Good, that's good. Horace's breathing grew more labored. Violet, the box, under the bed, your mother's things. Should have given them to you years ago. Violet looked to Daniel, who immediately knelt and retrieved a small wooden box from beneath the bed. She recognized it immediately, her mother's keepsake box, once a fixture on the dressing table in their family home. "Open it," Horace urged weakly. "The ring. She'd want you to have it." With trembling fingers, Violet lifted the lid to reveal the modest treasures her mother had valued: a cameo brooch, a packet of letters tied with faded ribbon, a lock of baby hair that must have been Violet's, and a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Her engagement ring," Violet whispered. "I thought you'd sold it years ago." Horace shook his head slightly. "Couldn't. Last piece of her I had." His eyes moved between Violet and Daniel. "Should be yours now, for your future." The gesture, unexpected and deeply meaningful, brought fresh tears to Violet's eyes. "Thank you, Father." Horace's eyelids fluttered, his strength clearly fading. "Be happy, Violet, be loved. That's all. All I want now." He drifted into unconsciousness after that, his breathing growing increasingly shallow. Doc Williams returned to check on him, confirming what Violet already knew: the end was very near. She sat holding her father's hand as the hours passed, Daniel a steady presence beside her. Occasionally, she would speak softly to Horace, telling him about the ranch, about her hopes, about memories from childhood that she treasured despite everything that came after. As dawn approached, Horace Lawson drew his final breath, passing from the world with his daughter's hand in his and her forgiveness granted, imperfect, still evolving, but real. The funeral was held 2 days later, a simple affair attended by more people than Violet had expected. It seemed that in death, Colorado City remembered Horace Lawson as he had once been: a hardworking settler, a skilled horseman, a man who had loved his wife deeply rather than the broken alcoholic he had become. Daniel stood beside Violet throughout, his quiet strength sustaining her through the service and the condolences that followed. Mrs. Holloway had prepared a small reception at the Xavier Ranch, and many from town made the journey out to pay their respects, including Sheriff and Mrs. Burns, the Petersons, and even Mr. Johnson from the general store. "Your father was a good man once," Mrs. Burns told Violet as they stood together on the porch, watching the winter sunset paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. "And in the end, he found his way back to some measure of that goodness through his love for you." "I hope so," Violet replied. "I'd like to believe that." "He did," Mrs. Burns affirmed. "Everyone could see it." She patted Violet's hand. "And everyone can see that you found happiness here." Her gaze drifted to where Daniel stood talking with the sheriff. "Mr. Xavier is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Violet corrected gently. Mrs. Burns smiled. "Then you're fortunate together, which is the best kind of fortune there is." As the guests gradually departed and the house grew quiet, Violet found herself drawn to the fireplace in the sitting room, watching the dancing flames as she had on so many evenings since coming to the ranch. The small wooden box containing her mother's possessions sat on the mantel, a connection to her past now integrated into her present. Daniel joined her after seeing the last guests off, standing beside her in companionable silence for several minutes before speaking. "How are you feeling?" Violet considered the question honestly. "Sad, relieved, grateful." She looked up at him. "At peace, I think, or getting there." He nodded, understanding. "Your father made mistakes, grievous ones, but in the end he recognized the remarkable woman his daughter had become. There's a kind of redemption in that." "Yes," Violet agreed softly, "for both of us." Daniel took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "What happens now is up to you, Violet. The ranch accounts are in perfect order. With the cattle contract secured, you could return east to finish your education if you wanted, or stay in Colorado City and open that school you once dreamed of." He paused, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. Or, she prompted when he hesitated. Daniel released her hand only to reach into his pocket, producing something that made Violet's breath catch her mother's ring. "Or you could stay here with me," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Not as my accountant or employee, but as my wife, my partner in all things." He held the ring but didn't yet offer it. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon after your father's passing. I know there will be talk in town, but I also know that I love you, Violet Lawson, and I don't want to waste another day not telling you so." Violet's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of joy. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "Not when I've known since that day in the saloon that you were the man who would change my life." "Is that a yes?" Daniel asked, hope lighting his features. "Yes," Violet said clearly, confidently. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife. Yes to all of it, Daniel." He slid the ring onto her finger, her mother's ring, a connection to her past now becoming a promise for her future. When he kissed her, Violet felt the last pieces of her heart healing, the final shadows of doubt receding. "They called me a waste," she murmured against his lips. "And I spent every day proving them wrong," Daniel finished, drawing back to gaze into her eyes with love and pride. "Though the truth is, you proved them wrong yourself. I just had the privilege of witnessing it." Violet's smile was radiant as she wound her arms around his neck. "Then witness this, Daniel Xavier. I love you and I always will." Their next kiss sealed the promise, not an ending but a beginning. Not a conclusion but a continuation of the journey they had started that fateful day in a Colorado City saloon. When a cowboy saw value in a woman the town had written off, and a woman found strength she'd forgotten she possessed. Spring came early to Colorado that year. By March, the snow had retreated from the valleys, leaving behind fresh grass and wildflowers that transformed the landscape from white austerity to vibrant life. At the Xavier Ranch, now officially the Xavier Lawson Ranch by Daniel's insistence, the season brought not just new calves and longer days, but preparations for a wedding. Violet stood on the front porch of what was now truly her home, surveying the changes the past few months had wrought. The ranch hands were constructing a new barn to replace the old one, which would be converted into a schoolhouse, the first step toward Violet's dream of education for local children, now integrated into their plans for the ranch's future. The main house had been expanded with a new wing, providing more space for the life she and Daniel were building together. Mrs. Holloway had taken to calling it the nursery wing, with meaningful glances that made Violet blush, though neither she nor Daniel discouraged such speculation. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel's voice came from behind her, followed by his arms slipping around her waist. Violet leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since that day in the saloon. How completely different my life is now." "Regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Not one," she replied, turning in his arms to face him, "though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't dropped that glass." Daniel smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in the gesture that had become a cherished habit. "I'd like to think I would have found my way to you somehow. That some things are simply meant to be, regardless of the path taken to reach them." "Such a romantic," Violet teased, though her eyes shone with matching sentiment. "Only with you," he admitted. "Before you, I wasn't sure I was capable of feeling this way again, after Kathleen died after the war." He shook his head. "But you changed that. You made me want to be the man I used to be before loss hardened me." Violet reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "We healed each other, I think." Daniel turned his head to press a kiss to her palm, "and will continue to do so every day." The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted their moment. Mrs. Holloway had arrived for her daily duties, accompanied today by Mrs. Burns, who had taken a keen interest in the wedding preparations. "No time for canoodling on the porch, you two, Mrs. Holloway called as she descended from the wagon with remarkable spryness for a woman of her years. "We have menus to finalize and arrangements to confirm. Only 3 weeks until the big day," Daniel groaned theatrically. "Remind me again why we didn't elope." "Because Mrs. Holloway would have tracked us down and dragged us back by our ears," Violet replied with a laugh. "And because, despite everything, it feels right to stand before our community and declare our commitment." "Our community," Daniel repeated thoughtfully. "It is that now, isn't it? Not just a town that judged you or land I purchased to escape my past, but a place where we belong." Violet nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The past months had seen a gradual but significant shift in their relationship with Colorado City. The successful cattle contract had brought prosperity that benefited local businesses. Violet's plans for a school had been met with enthusiasm by families tired of sending their children long distances for education. And their personal story from that confrontation in the saloon to their upcoming wedding had captured the town's imagination in a way that transformed skepticism into something like collective investment in their happiness. "They'll all be there," Violet said, referring to the wedding. "Even Mr. Wilkins from the saloon sent a note accepting our invitation." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Forgiveness extends that far, does it?" "Not forgiveness exactly," Violet corrected. "More like moving beyond, refusing to let past slights define future possibilities." "A philosophy to live by," Daniel agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead before releasing her as Mrs. Holloway and Mrs. Burns approached, arms laden with fabric samples and lists. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the April sky an unblemished blue that seemed created specifically for the occasion. Violet stood in what had once been her cabin, now converted to a guest house, as Mrs. Burns and Mrs. Peterson helped her prepare. Her dress was simple but elegant ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered specially from Denver. Her hair was arranged in a coronet of braids, with sprigs of wildflowers gathered that morning by the Peterson children woven throughout. "You look beautiful, dear Mrs. Burns declared, stepping back to assess her handiwork. "Absolutely radiant." "It's happiness, not the dress," Mrs. Peterson observed with a smile, "though the dress certainly doesn't hurt." Violet studied her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the confident, glowing woman who looked back at her. Gone was the desperate, defensive young woman who had stood in the saloon with broken glass at her feet, replaced by someone who knew her worth, who had found her place in the world. "It's time," Mrs. Burns announced, consulting the small watch pinned to her bodice. "The guests are seated and Daniel is waiting." The ceremony was to take place in the meadow behind the main house, where a simple archway had been constructed and decorated with early spring flowers. As Violet approached on Sheriff Burns' arm, he had offered to give her away, an honor that had brought tears to her eyes when proposed. She saw the gathered community rise to their feet, ranch hands and townspeople, the banker and the blacksmith, the saloon owner and the minister's wife, all united in witnessing this moment. And at the end of the aisle, standing tall and proud beneath the archway, was Daniel. His face as he watched her approach held such love, such wonder, that Violet felt her heart might burst with answering emotion. When she reached him and Sheriff Burns placed her hand in Daniel's, the connection between them felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar yet miraculous, ordinary yet extraordinary. "You are breathtaking," Daniel whispered as the minister began the service. Their vows were traditional with personal additions, promises not just of love and fidelity, but of partnership, of mutual respect, of continuing to see the best in each other, even when times grew difficult. When Daniel placed the gold band beside her mother's engagement ring, his hands were steady, but his eyes glistened with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared to the assembled guests. Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Violet Xavier. Their first kiss as a married couple was met with cheers and applause, the celebration continuing well into the evening with music and dancing, food and laughter beneath lanterns strung from trees around the meadow. "Are you happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Daniel asked as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Deliriously, Violet confirmed, her eyes never leaving his. "And you, Mr. Xavier?" "More than I ever thought possible." He drew her closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant for her alone. "I once promised to spend every day proving wrong those who called you a waste. Today feels like the culmination of that promise." "Not the culmination," Violet corrected gently. "Just another beginning. We have a lifetime of days ahead to build this ranch, to start our family, to create the school, to be partners in all things." She smiled up at him, her heart in her eyes. "Every one of those days will be proof of what we've found together." Daniel's answering smile was all the confirmation she needed, that he understood that the promise made in a saloon months ago had evolved into something far greater than either could have imagined. It had become not just the foundation of their love story, but the cornerstone of the life they would build together in this wild, beautiful land they now called home. And as the music played and the stars emerged in the vast Colorado sky, Violet and Daniel Xavier danced into their future, surrounded by a community that had witnessed their journey from judgment to acceptance, from brokenness to healing, from two separate stories into one shared narrative of redemption, love, and the courage to begin again.